The courtyard of the temple buzzed with life as pilgrims from many lands streamed in, their sandals brushing against stone worn smooth by generations. It was a place of worship, of reverence, and at times of display. The sound of coins clinking into metal chests often rose above the murmured prayers. Jesus and his disciples had spent the morning teaching in the temple courts, moving among the crowds with quiet purpose. But now, Jesus paused, his attention fixed on a particular area where the offering chest stood. These offering chests were shaped like trumpets, wide at the top and narrow at the bottom. When people dropped coins into them, the metal amplified the sound. For some, it became an opportunity to be noticed. The wealthy approached with confidence. Their garments flowed, their movements deliberate, their gifts heavy with silver. As they dropped their offerings into the treasury, a loud ringing echoed through the courtyard, drawing glances of admiration. Jesus watched without saying a word. His eyes, however, held something deeper, something the disciples would soon understand. Standing far behind the wealthy givers was a woman nearly invisible to the crowd. Her clothing was simple, worn thin from years of struggle. Her steps were soft, as though she hoped not to take up space she did not deserve. She was a widow, one of the most vulnerable in society. Her husband was gone, her security gone with him. In that day, a widow often survived on the edge of hunger, relying on scraps of work and the kindness of others. In her hand, she carried 2 tiny copper coins, the smallest currency in the land. They were nearly weightless, worth almost nothing to anyone else, but they were everything she had left. As she approached the treasury, she kept her eyes low. The crowd around her barely noticed her passing. No one stepped aside, no one paused to let her through. She slipped forward like a shadow. The widow stopped at the offering chest, her fingers trembling slightly. She looked down at the 2 coins, feeling their cool metal press into her palm. These coins were her food, her very survival. Yet her heart was steady. She had learned long ago that God alone was her provider. What she had, she would give. What she lacked, God would supply. With a quiet breath, she dropped the coins in. Tink, tink. The sound was barely audible amid the booming offerings of the wealthy. But Jesus heard it as though it echoed through heaven itself. Jesus' eyes softened. His lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, not of amusement, but of deep admiration. He turned to his disciples, who had still been watching the showy displays of generosity. "Truly I tell you," Jesus said, his voice filled with conviction, "this poor widow has given more than all the others." The disciples glanced at one another, confused. They had seen her offering. They knew how small it was. How could it outweigh the wealth poured in moments earlier? Jesus continued, "For all of them gave out of their abundance. But she, out of her poverty, has given everything she had to live on." The disciples' expressions changed as understanding dawned. It was not the amount that mattered to God, but the heart behind the gift. The widow had held nothing back. Meanwhile, the widow walked away with the same quiet humility she had arrived with. She did not know she had become the center of heaven's attention. She only knew that she had honored God. As she stepped back into the busy streets of Jerusalem, the weight of uncertainty lay before her where her next meal would come from, how she would survive the week. But her spirit was unburdened. She had entrusted her life to the Lord, fully and without reservation. And in that surrender, she found peace deeper than the world could offer. The wealthy givers returned to their homes proud, confident in their impressive contributions. Yet their hearts lacked the simple devotion found in the widow's tiny gift. Jesus' lesson lingered in his disciples' minds long after they left the temple courts. They realized that true generosity is measured not by the size of the gift, but by the sacrifice it requires. Years later, the story of the widow would continue to inspire believers. Her 2 coins became symbols of faith, small in the eyes of men, yet priceless to God. The disciples would remember that moment Every time they encountered someone who gave from the depths of their struggle, they would see, in those humble gifts, the same courage and devotion the widow had shown. And so her story lived on, a quiet reminder that God sees what others overlook, and that a heart fully surrendered is the greatest offering anyone can give, even when it comes wrapped in 2 tiny coins.